So in this video, Al and I are going to have a sit-down talk about how to deal with bombing out at a meet.
And bombing out is everyone's fear, right? No one wants to necessarily go up there and fail, right? You haven't trained all this time to go up there and bomb out because there's strategies to keep you from bombing out, right? But the fact is that it happens, right? And I think the question is not just like how do you deal with bombing out? It's like how have you dealt with failure in your life, right? How do you deal with failure in your life? And it's like you got two choices, right? Either you can accept that failure and stop training forever, right? Or go back to training but say I'm never going to compete again, or you could just get back on the horse. My suggestion obviously would be the latter, right? And it's get back on the horse, right? Just do it again. I had an athlete that bombed out 2 years ago. It was his first meet, and he was so worried about going as heavy as he could for his opening attempt. And I let him influence me a little bit also because he was so adamant about going heavy on his first attempt, this was a weight that we had done in the gym multiple times, but he got up there on the platform that day and he could not do it, right? And it was devastating for him at first. He's like, oh my God, I got all these people I invited, like how am I gonna say that I bombed out? And then he finished his meet and he was like, you know what, this was a great learning experience. Like I just figured out that one, not to open so heavy, right? And then two, I realized that like this isn't the end of my life, right? Like I can get back on, and guess what? We went back into our second meet, and he did better in his second meet. Obviously, he didn't do his first, right? Because he didn't make it, but he did great in his second meet. He did better in his third, and then he went to nationals. Failure is something that happens. Bombing out is something that happens, but we move on.
You know, one thing that I used to tell weightlifters who are part of the Olympic weightlifting team, right, is that if you don't learn to become a weightlifting monk, if you don't learn to become as zen as possible, like you're not gonna survive this sport, right? You're not gonna have a long career. You're not gonna do well, all right? Because especially in Olympic weightlifting, right, you fail more than you actually succeed, and that goes in training, that goes in competition, and all that, right? And people let it bother them a ton, right? And you can see when somebody's had like a competitive background and stuff or not, you know, because. And you can see it in both lights. You can see where somebody's, you know, had a competitive background, they played another sport, they've done very well in that sport. So when they come to Olympic weightlifting or they come to powerlifting and they don't do as well, they get really upset about it, okay? But then you also see another type of athlete that, you know, was just a competitive athlete their whole lives, but they know how to deal with failure, right? Because that's what you're gonna have in games. Like you're gonna lose games, right? You're gonna not make a team. You're gonna get cut, okay? It happens a lot, but you also see people who have never had that competitive background. They come to weightlifting and they've had, you know, a lot of success in other areas of their lives, but then they see all this failure within weightlifting, right? And it eats at them. It eats at them more than it eats at not doing well in their career, which blows my mind, right? And then they lash out towards each other and they lash out towards themselves and they start degrading themselves. They lash out towards their coach, right? And it becomes a very toxic thing for them, right? But you really have to be detached to the outcome, right? There's only so much work you can put in. If you give your best effort within training, you give your best effort to your coach, you give your best effort in that competition itself, that's all you can do, right? And the outcome doesn't matter. So it is very much like a Buddhist mindset, right? Where you just do what you know that you can do. You control the variables that you can control, and whatever happens. This is something that I had to learn too, right? It definitely didn't bother me towards the latter half of my like competitive career, right? Because I understood that's exactly how I can continue to make progress. Because if I let this bother me so much where it starts affecting everything I do, all that's gonna do is make me worse.
this is becoming some philosophical.
Everything
shit.
I do becomes philosophical.
No, but it's before we had to start this conversation. It's like bombing out, equating bombing out with failure is like it is, right? How do you deal with that in your life? And the same thing with, like Jesse said, being detached from the outcome. Like, yeah, it's a philosophical moment, right? But you have to be. You have to be detached from the outcome in a certain sense, because the fact that you don't know who you're going to be on that day. You don't know what type of factors are going to influence your life on that day. So if you bomb out, or if you even let's not go so far as bombing out. Let's say you don't compete up to the standard that you thought you were going to compete that day, right? But you watch yourself and you realize, like, that's all I had that day, right? It is what it is, right?
Yeah.
Get back on and do it again. And the other point you brought up, which I feel like is worth talking about, is the difference between bombing out in weightlifting versus bombing out in powerlifting, right? Because I feel like bombing out in powerlifting is a little bit more of a strategic question, right? Because if you pick a good opener on all three of your lifts, unless something pretty significant happens, you're not really gonna bomb out. Right?
Yeah.
You may not hit the numbers that you wanted to, but if you pick a good opener, you're gonna do okay, right? In weightlifting, that's a different ball game, right? Because it's a much more technical and it's a much more athletic sport. So your performance is contingent on all types of different factors besides just how strong you are.
Right.
No?
Yeah. But, you know, being the scientists that we are, to reel that in and actually give you actual practical ideas of how to deal with bombing out is one thing that you can do, okay, after you sulk and get drunk and all that, okay, is that you go back.
That's necessary. That's a necessary first step.
You go back and you look at the week before training, okay, or excuse me, the week of training before the actual meet, right? And you go back and you don't just look at what did I do for peaking as far as, what percentages and stuff I go to, when did I taper? Yes, look at that too, but also look at, all right, what life stresses did I have that week that maybe weren't usual, right? Okay. If you were dealing with a major life stress, then you can go back and be like, all right, like, I'm not a piece of shit, okay? I was dealing with this, mental, physical, emotional, okay? All stress is going to affect me. It's going to affect how I perform, okay? But then also look at, all right, what were your eating habits that week? Did they change? What were your sleeping habits? Were you hydrated? Did you change something that week, okay? Obviously, if you're cutting hard for that meet, that's going to play a huge role. The other thing that you can do is then look back, 3 months training prior, right? Now, this does require that you keep good logs of training, okay? But look at 3 months training prior and then compare that to your last meet. So say like my last meet and stuff, I did great, I set all PRs, I won, blah, 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 okay? This meet I bombed out, like I didn't even match that, okay? Now I can look back, all right, what were the 3 months of training that led up to the good meet? What were the 3 months of training led up to this meet? And actually look at like a side-by-side comparison there, right? Okay, what did I do here? What did I do here? How much higher is my volume here? How much higher is my volume here? Okay, that will give you at least an understanding, or maybe hopefully an understanding of like what could have possibly went wrong, right? And that for a lot of people that relieves a huge amount of like psychological burden from a bombing out, that like, all right, I haven't reached my peak in my performance. I messed up on my training leading up to that meet. If you do bomb out a lot, you can contact us, and hopefully what happened to his client won't happen to you. Fluke.
Sign up with me.
And if you like this,
bombing out feel good.
If you learned something from this, like, subscribe, and share, and do it right now.